To everyone else, it was a dream wedding on a secluded island. But to Bill, it was a trap. A sinister plan was unfolding, and only he could see it. The clock was ticking. Drop a comment and share where you're joining us from. If stories like this resonate with you, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next inspiring journey. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light over the secluded island resort. Palm trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves whispering secrets to the ocean waves below. The air smelled of salt and hibiscus. But for 8-year-old Bill, the beauty of the scene did little to ease the knot tightening in his stomach. He tugged at the stiff collar of his tiny suit and glanced around nervously. The guests, dressed in flowing dresses and sharp suits, milled about the pristine beach, their chatter blending with the sound of the tide. A floral arch stood proudly near the shoreline, marking the spot where the wedding ceremony would soon begin. The bride, Emma, had chosen this remote island specifically for its intimacy and exclusivity. To everyone else, the setting was paradise. But to Bill, it felt more like a cage. His father, William, stood a few feet away, laughing heartily with some old college friends. William looked happier than Bill had seen him in years. His broad shoulders relaxed, his smile unguarded. Dressed in a tailored cream suit, William looked every bit the part of the devoted groom. Bill wanted to feel happy for him. He wanted to believe that Emma, with her flawless smile and soft laughter, would bring his father the joy he deserved. But something about her made Bill's skin prickle. Emma swept into view then, her wedding gown catching the breeze, making her look like something out of a fairy tale. Her blonde hair was pinned into an intricate bun, and her makeup was flawless. As she glided toward William, her emerald eyes briefly flicked to Bill. The smile she gave him was tight and hollow, like a doll's. "Bill," she said, her voice smooth and sweet like syrup, "you look so handsome today. Are you excited to be the ring bearer?" Bill nodded stiffly. "Yes, ma'am." Emma's smile faltered for just a second before she turned her attention back to William, slipping her hand into his arm. The moment passed, but Bill felt it like a shiver down his spine. As the preparations continued, Bill wandered away from the crowd and perched himself on a rocky outcrop overlooking the sea. The vastness of the water made him feel even smaller. But at least out here, away from the rehearsed laughter and polished smiles, he could breathe. "Bill, there you are, buddy." William's voice cut through the quiet, and moments later, his father sat down beside him. William's smile was warm, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "You nervous about your big job today?" William asked, ruffling Bill's dark hair. "A little," Bill admitted. William chuckled. "You're going to be great. And Emma, she's going to be good for us. Kiddo, you'll see. She loves you already." Bill forced a smile, but his stomach felt heavier than before. He wanted to believe William, wanted to trust that Emma's kindness was real, but his gut told him otherwise. As the sun began to set, the guests took their seats on the sand. The ceremony was moments away. Bill stood near the altar, clutching the small velvet box holding the wedding rings. His small hands trembled slightly. Emma appeared again, walking arm in arm with her father as the soft melody of a string quartet played. She was breathtaking, her gown glowing in the amber light of the sunset. All eyes were on her, except Bill's. His gaze was fixed on her face, watching closely. For a split second, as she passed him, her expression shifted. The smile dropped, and something sharp and unkind flickered in her green eyes. It was gone before anyone else could notice. The officiant began speaking. His voice calm and measured. William's face radiated happiness. And Emma's voice was steady as she spoke her vows. But Bill couldn't focus on the words. His mind was too busy replaying that fleeting moment, Emma's cold expression, and the way it made his chest feel tight. The island's isolation felt more oppressive now. Emma had chosen this place deliberately. Far from prying eyes. Far from easy escape. Bill's gaze swept over the guests, noting how small and contained the gathering was. If something went wrong, if someone needed help, where would they run? When the officiant called for the rings, Bill stepped forward, holding up the small velvet box. Emma's eyes locked onto his. Her smile stretched just a little too wide. "Thank you, Bill," she said sweetly. But behind the sweetness, there was something else. Something cold. The ceremony concluded with applause and cheers as William and Emma shared their first kiss as husband and wife. Guests rose from their chairs, glasses of champagne already being passed around. Bill stayed frozen in place, his small chest rising and falling rapidly. As the celebration spilled into the night, fairy lights twinkling above the beachside reception, Bill watched Emma from the shadows. She laughed and danced with William, her charm turned up to full volume. But every now and then, when she thought no one was looking, her gaze would flick toward Bill. And every time, he felt it like ice water down his spine. The stars hung heavy in the sky as Bill sat on the steps of the villa, away from the noise of the party. He stared out at the moonlit waves, his mind racing. "Bill?" He turned sharply to find Emma standing behind him, her silhouette framed by the villa lights. Her smile was there again, perfectly painted on her face. "You shouldn't wander off alone, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'm fine," Bill replied. Emma stepped closer, her shadow stretching across the stone steps. "You know, Bill, we're family now. You and me. Isn't that nice?" Bill didn't respond. He could feel her eyes on him, studying him like a hawk watching a mouse. After a long moment, Emma's smile faded slightly. "Good night, Bill." She turned and disappeared into the villa, her heels clicking against the stone floor. Bill let out a shaky breath. The waves crashed in the distance, and the stars above seemed impossibly far away, somewhere deep in his chest. He knew this wedding wasn't the start of something good. It was the start of something very, very wrong. The morning after the wedding, the island was bathed in soft golden light. But Bill felt no warmth from it. The waves lapped gently at the shore, and the distant hum of resort staff preparing breakfast carried through the air. William was already down by the beach, chatting animatedly with some guests, his happiness radiating like the sun overhead. Bill, however, lingered near the villa, clutching a half-eaten piece of toast. Emma emerged from the master suite, her silk robe fluttering as she moved across the terrace. Her hair was perfect, her smile sharp. "Good morning, Bill," she said cheerfully. "Good morning," Bill muttered, his voice barely rising above the sound of the wind. Emma's smile faltered slightly, but only for a moment. "Why don't you go join your dad on the beach? It's such a beautiful day." "I'm not hungry," Bill replied, staring down at the tiles. For a brief second, Emma's face changed. The warmth drained from her eyes, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Suit yourself," she said, her voice lower now, almost clipped. Then, just as quickly, she turned away, her sweet facade slipping back into place as she waved to one of the staff members below. Bill felt his stomach twist into knots. He wanted to tell his dad, to pull him aside and explain how Emma's voice changed when they were alone. But every time he tried, the words stuck in his throat. William was so happy, so in love. Bill couldn't bring himself to shatter that. The rest of the day passed in a haze of forced smiles and uneaten meals. Emma played the perfect hostess, always by William's side, laughing at his jokes and charming every guest who crossed her path. But every now and then, when no one else was watching, she'd glance at Bill, just a flicker of ice in her emerald eyes, and he'd feel like the air had been sucked out of the room. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Bill found himself wandering the villa hallways. William was busy with the guests again, and Emma had disappeared somewhere upstairs. Bill's feet carried him to the master suite door, which was slightly ajar. He hesitated. From inside, he heard Emma's voice, low, urgent. Bill leaned closer, straining to hear. "No. I told you we need more time. The doctor said the procedure must be done carefully." "Yes, Mark. I know the risks." Bill froze. Who is Mark? What procedure? His pulse thundered in his ears as he strained to hear more. A loud creak echoed through the hallway as Bill shifted his weight, and Emma's voice went silent. The door flew open, and there she stood, Emma. Her phone clutched tightly in her hand. Her face twisted into something cruel and sharp. "What are you doing here?" she snapped. Bill stammered, his voice trembling. I was just... You were eavesdropping." Emma stepped closer, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Her green eyes bored into his, unblinking. "That's very rude. Bill, haven't your parents taught you any manners?" Bill stepped back, nearly stumbling over his own feet. "I didn't mean to." Emma's face softened, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's okay, sweetheart. But you shouldn't wander around like this. You might hear things you shouldn't." Bill nodded quickly and bolted down the hall, his heart pounding in his chest. That night, Bill lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slowly overhead. Emma's words replayed in his mind, the doctor, the procedure. Mark. They didn't make sense, but they sounded serious, dangerous, even. William poked his head into Bill's room before heading to bed. "Hey, buddy. You okay? You seemed a little quiet at dinner tonight." "I'm fine," Bill lied. William frowned slightly but didn't press. "Okay. Sleep tight, champ." The door closed softly, and Bill was alone again. Outside, the sound of the ocean waves filled the silence. The following morning, Bill sat at the edge of the pool, watching Emma sip a mimosa under a wide sun hat. She looked perfectly at ease, her phone resting on the table beside her. William was off talking to the resort manager about an upcoming snorkeling trip, leaving Bill and Emma alone. Emma caught him staring and smiled faintly. "Something on your mind, Bill?" Bill looked away quickly. "No." "Good. You should relax. Enjoy the island." But Bill couldn't relax. His eyes drifted back to her phone. He could still hear her voice in his head. The doctor said the procedure must be done carefully. When Emma excused herself to speak to a staff member, leaving her phone unattended, Bill's pulse quickened. He glanced around. No one was watching. He crept over to the table, his small hands trembling as he picked up the phone. The screen was still unlocked, open to a messaging app. A conversation with someone named Mark was visible. "Mark," the doctor confirmed. "Everything is ready. Just stick to the plan." Emma understood. No mistakes this time. Bill's breath hitched. What plan? What were they talking about? Before he could read further, a shadow fell over him. What do you think you're doing? Emma's voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. Bill jumped, dropping the phone onto the table. Emma snatched it up, clutching it tightly. Never touch my things, she hissed, her emerald eyes blazing. Do you understand me? Bill? Bill nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Emma smiled, but it was the same hollow smile he'd seen before. Good boy. Now run along and play. Bill stumbled away from the table, his heart hammering in his chest. The sun was bright, the sky impossibly blue, but the shadows around Emma seemed darker than ever. As the day went on, Bill's unease grew. He couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was lurking just beneath the surface of Emma's smile, and he was running out of time to figure out what it was. The days following Bill's discovery of Emma's cryptic messages were heavy with unease. The island remained picturesque, cerulean skies, gentle waves, and golden sunsets, but for Bill, every shadow seemed sharper, every glance from Emma colder. William, still basking in post-wedding bliss, remained oblivious to the tension threading through the air. At breakfast one morning, Bill sat across from Emma at a small patio table overlooking the ocean. William had gone into the village with a few guests, leaving the two of them alone. Emma sipped her coffee, her emerald eyes watching Bill over the rim of her mug. You've barely touched your food, Bill, she said sweetly, though her smile was tight. Is something wrong? Bill pushed scrambled eggs around his plate. I'm not very hungry. Emma set her cup down with a soft clink. That's not good. Sweetheart, you need to eat. You wouldn't want your dad worrying, would you? The way she said it made Bill's stomach twist. It wasn't concern, it was a warning. Later that afternoon, while William was napping in the sunroom, Bill sat on the villa's porch steps, clutching his sketch pad. Drawing had always been his escape, a way to put the world into shapes and lines he could understand. But today, every pencil stroke felt heavy. Still sulking. I see. Emma's voice cut through the sound of the waves, and Bill flinched as she stepped into view. She had an easy smile, but her eyes were sharp. I'm not sulking, Bill muttered. Emma knelt down to his level, her face inches from his. Your father is happy now, Bill. Happier than he's been in years. You wouldn't want to ruin that, would you? Bill shook his head. Good boy, she said softly, patting his cheek before standing up. Now go wash up for dinner, and put on something nice. Your dad wants us all to look our best tonight. Underscore 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 underscore. The evening sun was dipping below the horizon when Bill found himself seated at an elegantly decorated table near the edge of the beach. Strings of golden lights hung overhead, and the smell of grilled seafood filled the air. William, seated at the head of the table, laughed easily with the guests while Emma sat beside him, her smile dazzling. But Bill noticed the way her hand lingered possessively on William's arm, the way her gaze flickered to Bill whenever William wasn't looking. Bill, Emma said suddenly, her voice loud enough to draw attention. Why don't you tell everyone about the little adventure you had yesterday? Wandering around where you shouldn't have been. Bill froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. I wasn't. Oh. Don't be shy, darling. Emma continued with a tinkling laugh. You nearly gave me a heart attack. Creeping around the villa like that. You really must learn to respect privacy. William glanced at Bill, his brow furrowing slightly. Bill, were you bothering Emma? No, Bill said quickly. I wasn't bothering her, I just... Emma placed a gentle hand on William's arm. It's fine, darling. He's just adjusting to all these changes. Aren't you, Bill? Her smile was syrupy sweet, but her eyes locked onto his like steel traps. Bill's face burned with humiliation. He looked down at his plate, unable to speak. The other guests shifted uncomfortably before someone changed the subject. Underscore 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 underscore. That night, Bill waited until the villa was quiet. The faint sound of waves and the distant hum of music from the beach lingered in the air. William had gone to bed hours ago, and Bill could hear faint laughter from Emma's suite. He couldn't stay silent anymore. Bill tiptoed to William's room and gently pushed the door open. Moonlight streamed in through the curtains, illuminating his father's sleeping form. Dad, Bill whispered, shaking William's shoulder. William stirred, blinking up at Bill. Buddy? What's wrong? Bill's heart was hammering in his chest. Dad, I need to talk to you. It's about Emma. William sat up, rubbing his eyes. Bill, it's late. Can this wait until morning? No. Dad, it's important. Please. You have to listen to me. Emma, she's not who you think she is. William sighed, running a hand through his hair. Bill, we've talked about this. I know this is a big change for you, but Emma cares about us. She loves you. No, she doesn't. Bill's voice cracked. She talks differently when you're not around. She's mean to me. She said things about you. About a doctor. About a plan. William's face tightened. Bill. Stop. But Dad. Stop. William's voice was sharp, and Bill flinched. William sighed again, softer this time. Look, buddy. I know this is hard, but Emma isn't your enemy. You've been through a lot, and it's natural to feel protective of me. But you have to trust me. I love her. She's good for us. Tears welled in Bill's eyes. She's lying to you. Dad. Please. You have to believe me. William shook his head. Go to bed. Bill. We'll talk about this tomorrow. Bill stood there for a moment, trembling. Then he turned and walked out of the room, his father's words echoing in his ears. Underscore 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 underscore. The next morning, William acted as if the conversation had never happened. He laughed with Emma over breakfast, kissed her cheek, and went about his day as usual. But something inside Bill had shifted. If William wouldn't believe him, Bill would have to find proof. Real proof. Over the following days, Bill began observing Emma more closely. He noticed the way she would step away to take hushed phone calls, how she would lock certain drawers in her suite, how her smile never quite reached her eyes when William wasn't around. One evening, Bill saw Emma typing furiously on her phone before quickly tucking it into her purse when she noticed him watching. As the shadows grew longer and the resort lights flickered on, Bill's fear gave way to resolve. He would figure out what Emma was hiding. He would find the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. Because if he didn't, he was sure something terrible was going to happen. The sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the silence around him as Bill sat on the edge of the porch, staring out into the night. He was just a kid, but he wasn't going to let Emma win. Not now. Not ever. The air on the island had changed. The salty breeze felt colder. The vibrant colors of the ocean seemed duller, and the endless blue sky felt heavy with an invisible weight. Bill couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Emma's sharp glances and icy smiles had become more frequent. And William, blissfully unaware, continued walking straight into whatever trap Emma had set. It happened one humid afternoon while William was resting on the porch, his skin pale and his movements sluggish. Emma had insisted he take some of his special vitamins before lying down. Bill had watched from the shadows as William swallowed 2 capsules Emma handed him with a glass of water. William's condition had been worsening: headaches, dizziness, sudden fatigue. Bill knew it wasn't normal, but every time he tried to bring it up, William brushed it off as wedding stress or the island heat. Bill needed answers, and he needed them fast. That evening, the villa was eerily quiet. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. Bill crept down the dimly lit hallway toward Emma's suite. The door was ajar, and he could hear her voice, a sharp whisper. "Mark, I told you we have to stick to the timeline. Tomorrow morning. The scuba trip. It's the perfect cover. He's weak. He's not a strong swimmer. And no one will suspect a thing." Bill's breath caught in his throat. He pressed his back against the wall, every muscle in his body frozen. "Yes. The insurance is finalized. The will is signed. Everything goes to me. Once it's over, we disappear. Mark, you and me." There was silence for a moment before Emma spoke again, her voice lower, more venomous. "No mistakes this time. You know what happens if you mess this up." Footsteps clicked on the marble floor, and Bill's heart leapt into his throat. Emma was moving towards the door. Bill scrambled down the hallway, darting into a linen closet just as Emma stepped into the hall. Through a sliver of light between the door and the frame, he saw her pause, her emerald eyes scanning the corridor. After what felt like an eternity, Emma turned and disappeared back into her room. Bill stayed hidden for several long minutes before daring to move. His hands were shaking, and his breaths came in shallow gasps. He had to act. Now. Bill hurried to William's study, his small hands fumbling with the desk drawers. Most of them were locked, but one near the bottom gave way with a creak. Inside, neatly stacked papers and folders greeted him. Bill rifled through them until a specific document caught his eye. It was William's life insurance policy. His eyes scanned the page, his stomach turning as he realized the payout, an enormous sum, was now listed under Emma's name. Bill knew enough to understand that something was terribly wrong. Next, he found William's updated will. The signatures looked fresh, the ink still slightly glossy under the desk lamp's glow. Bill's mind raced. Emma was planning something fatal during the scuba trip. The pills she had been giving William, the dizziness, the fatigue, it wasn't stress. It was poison. He froze as he heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching the study. Quickly, Bill shoved the papers back into the drawer, closed it as quietly as he could, and darted behind a curtain just as the study door creaked open. Emma entered the room, phone in hand. her voice sharp as she spoke into it. Yes, Mark. Tomorrow morning. After breakfast. Everything will look like an accident. And if the boy gets in the way. She paused, her tone growing colder. You know what to do. Bill clamped a hand over his mouth to stifle a gasp. Emma stood in silence for a moment before turning and walking out of the study, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Bill's heart hammered in his chest. If he didn't do something now, William wouldn't make it past tomorrow. The night felt endless. Bill lay in his bed, clutching his blanket, his mind racing with fragmented thoughts. His father was in danger, real danger, and no one believed him. Not William. Not the guests. Not anyone. Tears stung his eyes. But he blinked them away. He had to be brave. If no one else could stop Emma, then he would. At dawn, Bill woke with a start. The villa was quiet, and the soft light of morning crept through the curtains. William's door was still closed, but Emma was already awake. Bill could hear her voice drifting in from the porch. He crept to the window and peeked through a crack in the curtains. Emma stood there, phone pressed to her ear, a satisfied smirk on her face. Yes, Mark. Everything's ready. William will be too weak to fight back once we're underwater. And Bill? Don't worry. He's just a kid. He won't do anything. Bill pulled back from the window, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Emma turned and walked back inside the villa. Bill had heard enough. Breakfast felt like a ticking time bomb. William sat at the table, pale and sluggish, while Emma buzzed around him with a rehearsed cheerfulness. You're going to love snorkeling today, darling, Emma said, placing a hand on William's shoulder. The water is so clear this morning. It'll be a perfect day for it. William smiled weakly, his head nodding slightly. Bill couldn't take it anymore. Dad. Please, he said suddenly, his voice trembling. Don't go snorkeling. Please. You have to listen to me. William frowned, looking up at Bill. Bill, what are you talking about? Emma's smile froze, her emerald eyes locking onto Bill with an icy glare. Bill, she said softly, but there was a warning edge in her voice. Don't be silly. Your father will be perfectly safe. No, he won't. Bill shouted, his voice cracking. She's lying. Dad. Emma's lying. She wants to hurt you. She's been poisoning you. She's planning something bad today during the dive. The table fell silent. William stared at Bill, his brow furrowed deeply. Bill, William said slowly, his voice heavy with exhaustion. That's enough. No. Dad. Please. Bill's voice was desperate now. I heard her on the phone. I saw the insurance papers. She's been giving you pills. You have to believe me. Emma let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. Oh. Bill. You've always had such an active imagination. It's just a misunderstanding. But William didn't look at Emma. He was staring at Bill, his face pale, his hand trembling slightly as it rested on the table. For the first time, doubt flickered in William's eyes. Emma noticed it too. Her smile faded, her lips pressing into a thin line. Bill's small chest heaved as he stared at his father. Please. Dad. Please believe me. The faint sound of distant waves filled the silence. And then William spoke, his voice low. Emma, what have you done? The sun rose over the island, casting long golden streaks across the sky. The day was supposed to be perfect, another celebration for William and Emma. a continuation of the picturesque dream. But to Bill, the morning light felt harsh, glaring down on a truth only he seemed to see. Guests bustled about the beach, dressed in their finest island attire, as staff scurried to finalize the decorations. White flowers adorned the arch by the shoreline, and the chairs were arranged in neat rows facing the endless blue ocean. Everything looked flawless. But beneath the surface, something dark simmered. Bill sat on the villa's balcony, knees pulled up to his chest, watching Emma below. She moved through the guests like a predator in silk, her smile flawless, her laughter like glass bells. But Bill saw the steel in her gaze, the sharp edges of someone with everything to lose. William was in the sunroom, looking pale and tired. His smile was there, but faint, as though painted on. Time was running out. The ceremony began as the midday sun reached its peak. Guests fanned themselves under the heat, their attention fixed on the altar where William stood, looking both happy and fragile in his light cream suit. Emma walked down the aisle with a bouquet of white lilies, her gown trailing behind her like liquid pearl. Bill stood off to the side, clutching the small velvet box holding the rings. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to act, to do something. The officiant began speaking, his words a calm murmur against the sound of the waves. Emma's smile was radiant, but when her gaze flicked to Bill, it was like ice. "If anyone here objects to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace." The words hung in the air. Bill's chest tightened. His pulse roared in his ears. "Stop the wedding!" The shout tore out of him before he even realized he was speaking. Gasps rippled through the crowd as every head turned toward him. "She's going to hurt Dad." Bill's voice cracked with fear and desperation. "She's been poisoning him. She's lying to you all." William turned to look at Bill, his expression a mix of confusion and exhaustion. "Bill," William said softly. But Emma's face was the one Bill focused on. Her mask had cracked. For a brief second, the sweet bride facade slipped, and something sharp and cruel flashed in her eyes. "Bill." "Honey," Emma said, her voice trembling with feigned concern. "You're just confused. It's been such a stressful time." "Stop lying," Bill shouted. "I heard you on the phone. You're planning something bad, and you're going to hurt him." The guests murmured, uncertainty spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Emma's hands clenched around her bouquet, the knuckles white. "William, please," Emma said, turning to him with wide, teary eyes. "He's scared. He's just..." "Emma," William said slowly, his voice unsteady. "Is it true?" Emma froze, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The silence was deafening. Then, as if a switch flipped inside her, Emma's expression hardened. Her hand shot out, grabbing William by the wrist. In one swift motion, she pulled a small knife from beneath her bouquet and pressed it against his side. "Everyone stay back," she barked, her voice sharp and commanding. Screams erupted from the crowd. Guests stumbled over chairs, backing away from the altar. The officiant froze in place, his face pale. William stiffened, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Emma, what are you doing?" "Shut up and move," Emma hissed, pulling him back toward the edge of the beach. Bill's heart pounded as he stumbled forward. "No! Stop!" But Emma was already dragging William toward a small motorboat docked nearby, her knife pressed firmly against his side. The boat cut through the waves, carrying Emma and William farther out to sea. Bill had sprinted to the shoreline, his small legs churning through the sand. But he was too slow. He couldn't let this happen. Desperation clawed at him as he spotted a second boat tied to the dock. Without thinking, he jumped in, fumbling with the engine until it roared to life. The wind whipped through Bill's hair as he sped across the water, the salty spray stinging his eyes. Ahead, he could see Emma's boat slowing as it approached a cluster of rocky outcrops. Bill cut the engine and let his boat drift closer, his small frame pressed low against the seat. Emma had forced William into scuba gear. His movements were sluggish, his body weak from the poison. Emma strapped on her own gear and gestured sharply for William to follow her into the water. They disappeared below the surface. Bill's hands shook as he fumbled with a spare diving mask and oxygen tank stashed on the boat. His father needed him. He plunged into the cold water, the weight of the tank pulling at his small shoulders as he descended. The underwater world was a disorienting maze of blues and greens, with beams of sunlight piercing through the surface above. Visibility was limited, and the muffled sound of his own breathing filled his ears. Ahead, he spotted movement. Emma was guiding William deeper, her hand clamped tightly around his wrist. William's movements were weak and unsteady, bubbles rising erratically from his mask. Emma turned briefly, her gaze locking onto Bill. Even underwater, her emerald eyes burned with fury. She let go of William, shoving him backward, and swam rapidly toward Bill. Bill kicked his small legs furiously, propelling himself backward as Emma reached for him. Her hand closed around the strap of his tank, yanking him closer. But Bill's hands found something, a sharp piece of coral embedded in the rocks below. He swung it toward Emma, catching her arm. She recoiled, a trail of bubbles escaping her mask. Bill darted past her, swimming toward William, who was beginning to drift downward. Grabbing his father's arm, Bill kicked upward with every ounce of strength he had. The surface felt impossibly far away, his lungs burning as his oxygen supply dwindled. Above, the water shimmered with daylight. They broke through the surface with a gasp, both of them coughing and sputtering as they clung to each other. Behind them, Emma surfaced, her mask askew, her face twisted with rage. A motorboat engine roared nearby, the guests, the authorities. Someone had followed. Emma hesitated, her eyes flicking between Bill, William, and the approaching boat. Then, without a word, she dove back underwater and disappeared into the depths. Back on the boat, William collapsed onto the deck, his breath shallow but steady. The authorities were already pulling alongside them, voices shouting orders and radios crackling. Bill sat beside his father, clutching his hand tightly. William turned his head, his tired eyes meeting Bill's. "You saved me, buddy." Tears welled in Bill's eyes, but he nodded. "I couldn't let her hurt you, Dad." The sun hung low in the sky as the boats turned back toward the island, the waves carrying them away from the site of the final confrontation. Emma was gone, but Bill knew, deep down, that she wasn't finished. Somewhere out there, in the depths of the ocean or hidden on the far side of the island, she was waiting. But for now, they were safe. For now. The island was no longer paradise. The once vibrant skies felt dimmer, the sound of the waves heavier, and the salty breeze carried the weight of everything that had unfolded. Police boats dotted the horizon, their flashing lights reflecting off the water in sharp, rhythmic bursts. Officers moved through the resort, collecting evidence, interviewing guests, and combing through every corner of the villa. Bill sat on the edge of a deck chair, wrapped in a blanket despite the humid air. His small hands clutched a cup of lukewarm tea that one of the resort staff had pressed into them. His face was pale, his eyes hollow from exhaustion. Nearby, William sat with an oxygen mask over his face, his arm draped weakly around Bill's shoulders. "Hey, champ," William said, his voice raspy. "You doing okay?" Bill nodded slowly, but he couldn't find the words to respond. His father's face was gaunt, his skin still carrying the pale sheen of poisoning. But he was alive. That was all that mattered. Two police officers approached them, one holding a small notepad. The taller of the two, Detective Harris, cleared his throat softly. "Mr. Bennett." "Bill. I'm glad you're both safe. We've been able to piece together most of what happened here." William nodded weakly. "And Emma?" The detective sighed, flipping through his notepad. "We believe she escaped during the confusion. Her diving equipment was found washed up on a rocky part of the shore. But there's no sign of her body. If she's out there, she's gone to ground." William closed his eyes, his free hand clenching into a fist. Bill's chest tightened. He had hoped, prayed, that Emma had been caught, that she wouldn't be able to hurt them anymore. Detective Harris continued. "Mark has been taken into custody. He was found attempting to flee the island. He's cooperating with us now, giving us details about Emma's network and the plot against you. It seems Emma has done this before, targeting wealthy men, manipulating them, and staging accidents to collect insurance payouts." William's face crumpled slightly, his guilt plain on his face. "I should have seen it. I should have. I should have protected Bill better." Bill shook his head, gripping his father's arm tightly. "It's not your fault, Dad. You couldn't have known." William pulled Bill closer, pressing a shaky kiss to the top of his head. The following day, the villa felt empty. Most of the guests had left, and the police presence had thinned. William and Bill sat side by side on the porch overlooking the ocean. The waves rolled in steadily, indifferent to the chaos that had unfolded just hours before. "I was blind, Bill," William said softly, his voice trembling. "I let her into our lives. I let her get close to you. And you were brave. Braver than I ever could have been." Bill swallowed hard, his small fingers wrapped tightly around the armrest of his chair. "I was scared, Dad. But I couldn't let her hurt you." William turned to face Bill, his eyes glassy with tears. "You saved my life, Bill. You saved both of us." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything settling between them. Eventually, William spoke again. "We're going to move forward, okay? Just you and me. We'll go home, and we'll rebuild. No more secrets. No more shadows." Bill nodded, but the unease in his chest wouldn't fade. Back on the mainland, weeks passed in a blur. Investigations continued, and Mark's testimony revealed layers of Emma's deception. She was calculated, meticulous, and ruthless. Authorities across multiple regions were now searching for her, but she seemed to have vanished without a trace. William and Bill returned to their home, a spacious but cozy house surrounded by tall trees and far removed from the ocean. William began therapy, working through the guilt and regret that clung to him like an anchor. Bill returned to school, but he was quieter now, his sharp observations turning inward. In the evenings, William would sit with Bill in the living room, watching old movies or reading together. They leaned on each other, the bond between them growing stronger with every passing day. But the shadows of Emma's presence still lingered. One crisp fall afternoon, Bill arrived home from school to find William sorting through a stack of mail. Bills, advertisements, and a few handwritten letters were scattered across the kitchen table. "Hey, buddy," William said with a tired smile. "How was school?" "Okay," Bill replied, dropping his backpack by the door. William's smile faltered as he picked up a small postcard from the pile of mail. The front showed a picture of a sunlit coastal city, a place neither of them recognized. Slowly, William turned the card over. There were only 3 words written in neat, slanted handwriting. "See you soon." William's face turned pale as he handed the postcard to Bill. The boy stared at the words, his breath catching in his throat. "Dad," Bill whispered. William immediately stood, locking the front door and pulling the curtains closed. His movements were sharp, deliberate. "She's out there," William said, his voice low and tight. "She's still watching us." Bill felt a chill creep up his spine, his small hands trembling as he set the postcard on the table. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. That night, Bill lay awake in his bed, staring at the faint glow of the streetlight outside his window. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind against the siding, made him flinch. Emma was still out there. She was still watching. But as Bill closed his eyes, he reminded himself of one thing: he had faced her before. He had been brave when it mattered most. Whatever came next, he wouldn't let her win. In the quiet dark of their home, William sat in the living room, the postcard still clutched in his trembling hands. The words echoed in both their minds.
Emma disappeared into the shadows, but her chilling message remains. See you soon. What do you think happens next? Share your thoughts and this story with others. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.